Welcome back to Between Two Racks, where strength coaches pull apart the systems behind long-term progress. Today we're talking about how training has to evolve as you do, from your first session with an empty bar to the point where every kilo takes months to earn. So, let's kick it. So in this episode, we're going to break down the 3 stages of strength development: the novice, the intermediate, and the advanced. To get everyone started and settled in, I just kind of wanted to also say each of our training ages, because I think that's something even that people have a hard time grasping, because it is different depending on what someone understands as a training age. So for me, I started training in high school as a freshman in high school, but I don't really count my training age truly starting until I actually trained with Stefan and Alexandra, starting in pretty much more like 2013. I'd say I was more consistent to strength training, 2012, 2013. So I consider myself to have 12 years of training age, solid training background, good training. So I want each of you to answer, but also give your opinion in what that means in terms of, obviously you guys are all advanced, but I still somewhat consider myself intermediate, even though in terms of ages, training years in age, I would be considered advanced. How does that work?
Why do you consider yourself intermediate?
Because I don't believe that I need all of the super advanced methods that we teach all the time. So I'd still minimum effective dose. I'm not a beginner anymore, but I can still use what we teach as intermediate, not advanced. Steph's my coach, so he would probably decide if I was intermediate or advanced.
Because you've done some pretty advanced techniques, though, too, over the years.
Yes, but I don't need it constantly.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Your training age?
Well, if you base it on that, the way you say it, I would say intermediate, but I would consider myself advanced in terms of just, I've been training for 20 plus years. I wouldn't count my first 5-6 years of training either, because it was more for physique competition and stuff, and I was on and off weight training, where sometimes I did more cardio than I did weight training and stuff. It was really in 2005, I probably started more of a regimented type of programming. But yeah, I guess now with the way my body is feeling and stuff and
Oh, wait, it's impossible. You competed in figure and fitness in 1998, 1999, 2000.
No, I know, but that's what I'm saying. Those years, if we were going to calculate the amount of years I've been training for real, I would say 2005 is when I started, where it was more weight training. Because in 1998, 99, I didn't do, it was more bodybuilding type of training as opposed to strength. Yeah, there you go. It was more bodybuilding type as opposed to strength training.
Yeah, but it's still counted. Yeah. You still developed intermuscular coordination.
Yeah.
You finished third at the North Americans in 2001.
Well, okay, so the bottom line is I do consider myself advanced, but I don't need advanced methods now. My goals are different. I'm not trying to really get, that much stronger and do all this stuff. I just want to, maintain my strength. So I do things to maintain strength and minimize aches and pains.
So I started training at 14, so that was 21 years ago. But I would truly say I would count my training age as 15. So I was probably 20 before I was very consistent with a regimented training program. Before that, while yes, I was probably developing the intermuscular coordination, I was developing hypertrophy, it wasn't as consistent and structured to truly develop. It was a lot of wasted years based on, I was always doing it for sport, so it didn't really matter. It was always going to help me develop in the way that I wanted, but it wasn't truly dedicated to maximize the potential. So 15, 16 years of training age, I would think at this stage, is a more realistic number.
I mean, I started training 37 years ago, but true, real. I mean, my training was always structured, but like the first 10 years, it was me writing program based on books I would read or articles I would read. So it was a little all over the place. That's a period, like from 11 to 21 is when I tried a bazillion different things.
You were a program hopper.
Yeah. And so real training, I was 21 when I hired Larry, where now like it was more structured, more organized, more consistent, had more of a singular like framework. It was very bodybuilding, but with a huge Pollock influence. So technically my training age would be 27. But the thing about training age is it's hard because like training age, true training age, suppose that you've had like non-disrupted training for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
And the problem is most people in everyday life, like in my 30s when I moved, when I was 27 and I moved to the US. Now, for a while, like my focus was completely different. You know, I moved at the time in St. Louis, the gym wasn't even built. So I moved to St. Louis, but there was nothing. I didn't train for a while. So it was almost like I restarted training. And then, you know, like, started working for Pollock and Group. I was 35, and it was different focus. It was very work dominant. My training was more maintenance. So it's hard sometimes to just look at the training years and be like, oh, okay, that's my true training age, because there's ups and downs. There's tore my bicep in 2017 that put me away from training for 6 months. It was lots of fluctuations. But if you're training, let's say, an athlete, and everything is consistent and regular, then it's much easier to have a true training age, at least according to our definition. But to go back to you, like I would still qualify you as an advanced trainee, because being advanced does not necessarily mean that every training session you need to use like every bells and whistles available. That's not really what it means. I mean, we'll talk about this later, but one qualifier is your relative strength level. Okay. And according to your relative strength level, at least on a neural perspective, you are advanced. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need like crazy stuff all the time. But
that's just something I wanted to get across to people, is that like just because you are advanced still doesn't mean to throw everything at the client. Because
no matter what, in the end of the day, everyone's response to the training is going to be individual. How much recovery they need, how much stimulus they need, it's all an individual thing. We categorize people into novice, intermediate, and advanced to try and give us ourselves a direction with clientele.
Starting point, yeah.
But you still have to adjust to the individual. So while it's a great overview and a great starting point, but yeah, it's not the be-all, end-all.
That's why coaching nuances is so important, because yes, when you're advanced, you can afford to do more bells and whistles, but it doesn't mean that you need bells and whistles every training. It just means that you can do it at times in which it makes sense, and you'll advance from it, but it clearly doesn't mean that you need to do that stuff all the time. I think that's where there's a lot of misconception.
Yeah. So I want to start with obviously the novice, the beginner's training age. So normally when you're putting a time frame on this, you're saying 0 to 1 year of training age. And simply put, I know I hear you guys say it all the time, a lot has to do with the response to the training. So you have beginners that they keep getting better because they're just getting started. So going back to what makes a beginner or a novice client like truly a beginner. Because what if you have clients, like a lot of the time you kilo coaches can get a new client, but they've been working for a personal trainer for years. So they might come and say, how long have you been training? And that person says, I've been training for 3 years with a coach.
Yeah, but to me, that's basically erased. That's 0. Because
If it's not structured strength training, you're saying.
But it depends on their ability in the gym too. Like you could be in the gym for 10 years and you still can't do a split squat and you still can't. So then it would be zero.
Yeah.
Like even if you've been training with someone for 10 years, but like.
yeah, but you're right. And then there's the ability, but then there's the coaching.
Yeah.
And then there's the intent through the coaching and the intent from the trainee. And that's why it gets complicated. And of course, like my bias is always more performance based. So if I'm training, so when I started training you add a sports background.
Yeah.
Like you did gymnastics when you were younger. You did track when you were younger. You did.
And I dedicated myself to basketball.
But you played basketball.
Because she's like 6'2", 245.
But the thing is, so you've developed somewhat of a athletic ability. Your nervous system is more efficient, and on and on. So then, when you started training, then you train with intent. You train with a adequate frequency to actually elicit change. So then your year 0 to 1 training with me and Alex, you had drastic improvement because you had all of the underlying ability to be a true strength trainee. But if you're training someone who, you know, like for example, like early in my career, I was training either like the greatest generation or like older baby boomers, where culturally speaking, often the women, they didn't play much sports when they were younger. You know, that was not a womanly thing to do back then. So they start training because it's healthy for them, but they have zero athletic ability, very poor ability to recruit more units, very poor mind-muscle connection. And then you couple that with very low frequency. So now the learning curve is absolutely painstakingly slow. So 1 year might not be enough for them to then be qualified for an intermediate. So you need, like, we have our own definition, but you have to understand that our definition is based on more like avid strength training, people who truly love strength training and wants to have the benefits of strength training beyond just healthy living and bone loss, blah, 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 blah.
But the perfect example is like when we started at PG and we started coaching like the people in the office, and you were one of them. It was the same program for everybody. But like look at how you changed within 1 year, your strength, your abilities, everything. And then, no knock to them, but like look at the other women in that group. You know, they weren't consistent. They didn't do the lifestyle changes. The intent wasn't there, but they were you guys were on the same program. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So they would still be beginner versus you now that, you know.
Or just the ability to replicate. Like Alex, Tuesday, like 2 days ago. So you were. What was I doing? You were assessing my parents. Oh, okay. My parents, they're snowbirds. They just arrived to Florida, so Alex assessed them to write their next 6 months of training. And I went to watch them, and Alex is showing like a split squat. Then my mom is trying to mimic Alex, but hers, like, it doesn't even look like she's doing a split squat. No, whatsoever. It's like, what are you looking at?
And she's been doing split squats for like
years.
It's not the first time.
It's not the first time you've shown her.
But my mom has been technically strength training for now, 15 years, but never really with a coach. Yeah. So then I'm like, is her training age 15? No, I think her training age is like -2. Okay.
It's a good thing they're not listening.
Well, they don't understand English, so that's fine.
So we're good.
So it's so tricky, right? So we're doing this podcast because I think it's very valuable, but I don't necessarily want the coaches to go back to their like really, really jam-up clients that train twice a week and be like, man, you've been training for 4 years now. So
Yeah, but that's
let's
why
start doing Supramax eccentric
Yeah.
because Kilo said that after 2 years you can start introducing Supramax.
But
But
that's
also-
why the conversation is good, because you get more of the nuance of what we're saying.
Also, don't tell them they suck, 'cause after 5 years they're still beginner. Don't do that either.
So going back to what those clients need is always more of consistency. Like, consistency is key with them, because a lot of those people who never move past the novice aren't training 4 times a week. And when you talk about, you're saying after 2 years you can introduce those types of methods, what I always have to reinforce with so many of our students is what we teach is the ideal scenario. What we teach is for like the diehard strength training people, but what we teach still applies to everyone. It's just the nuance and your understanding the art of coaching comes into play of when you're applying certain things. So going back to the programming for these novice beginner people, so we have consistency, but when you're talking about just building a program, Porrick, what are the key things you want to look for?
Well, it's consistency across all training parameters. You don't want a lot of variation in exercise selection, intensities, rep ranges, tempos, rest periods. Like, it wants to be a very boring training program. Like, it should be, they're repeating the same things a lot, so they get a lot of rehearsal. They're actually learning movement patterns and motor learning. So when progression can occur, that they're going to be able to perform the exercise. So it's everything. Like, we want to hit the big block exercise. So we need them to be able to complete a squat pattern. Doesn't matter what pattern, but a squat pattern. They need to be able to do a hinge pattern. They need to be able to do a split squat or lunge pattern. They need to be able to do a press. They need to be able to do a pull. Ideally both, like across all angles. So vertical, incline, horizontal, and decline. Now, do they need to do all these at once? Not all the pressing angles, but they need to do a wide variety of movement, big block movement patterns with very simplistic exercise selection, not overly high intensities, not working overly close to failure, which is going to degrade their movement efficiency throughout the set. So it's really about trying to create as much motor learning as possible, so we can then make them or challenge them in more ways once they've actually got the movement patterns down.
This is like a big pain point of mine. Like, and I never understood it. I just don't understand. Maybe you guys know. Why is it that somehow strength training defies laws of learning? Like, it's the only physical activity that I can think of that somehow participants want extreme variety, otherwise they get bored. Nobody wants to learn to ride a bike and say, okay, tomorrow I'll go and ride my canoe to improve my bike.
Yeah.
They're going to ride their bike to get better at riding their bike. But somehow, strength training, their squat sucks. Cool, I'm going to do squats today, but can we do a bunch of other things and only squat 3 weeks later? No, it won't work. I just don't understand why strength training is that way. But like Porrick said, you need to pick like a select numbers of exercises that make sense, that the client can do, and you hammer those and you make sure that they get better at it. It's this simple.
Yeah, like if I was truly starting with someone who's never walked into the weight room, they would repeat the same training session at whatever frequency that they're going to the gym. It's most likely 2 to 3 times a week. So it'd be one full body session and they'll repeat that until they have some level of movement competency. Then once they can get that mastered, we can alternate between 2 different full body sessions. Then we can maybe think about something more drastic. But until they get to the point that they have some level of movement competencies, you're just delaying their progress by adding more variety.
And a lot of these clients too, when we're talking about general population, and like you were saying, you've all trained a lot of them, that they're training only a few times a week. They're coming for more of like a general fitness approach. It is these things, even though it might seem boring to them, that they're going to get the most benefit from overall to like truly develop the motor skills, the ability to do a squat pattern, a hinge, like all of those, what we call like bigger movements, even if it might not be the true squat or like a barbell overhead press, you're doing some variation, like regressed to the point where they can do it safely and be able to perform it well, and then just stay on that for as long as you can.
Absolutely. So, like for example, if you're an older woman and you start strength training because you want to prevent osteoporosis or slow it down, well, the only way strength training will help is if the bone structure feels tension, and the tension is challenging enough for the bone to respond by building a more solid bone. But if you're varying the exercise all the time and you cannot build proper strength on a movement pattern, then you're never subjecting the bone structure to enough tensile strength to elicit the response they're looking for. So you're basically just spinning your wheels, but not improving the thing as to why you're coming to train. Because if you look at any studies in strength training that prove the benefit of strength training for bone density, guess what they're doing? The exact same exercise protocol 3 times a week for the 12 to 16 week long study. They're not changing exercise every session, but somehow the personal training world has accepted that this is how it needs to be, because as a personal trainer, you get paid every time you change programs. You want to entertain the client. I get all of this, but it defeats the purpose of the task.
And then going back to, Porrick mentioned not training to failure, because that's something that's obviously popular now, like pushing it to failure, which in some instances, great, good. But for these beginner novice clients, you don't want to. You want to use more moderate loads and just small progression.
On compound complex exercises, yes. If you want, you can always put them into a machine. Come the end of the session, train to failure, no issues with that. It's for the motor learning aspect of your squat pattern, your hinge pattern. Then we do not want to train that to failure, because it's such a complex motor learning process that train to failure, all you're going to do is ingrain bad movement patterns and bad habits. So you then have to train that out of them at some stage. So for anything with a level of complexity to it, I would avoid going to failure. Have really high quality rehearsal. If the trainee warrants more specific work to train to failure, very either isolation exercises that they can't really mess up, or some level of machine-based work that there's no complexity to it. It's just working.
Yeah. I think it's important also just to set the expectation with the new client. Like, that's a conversation you should have with them right from the beginning, where you say all these things that, like, you need to learn how to move properly, do all these things. You're going to do the same movement until you master it. Like, so they know what to expect from you, and then it's a great time to have that conversation between, like, the trainer that doesn't write a program down and just does like a circus act every different day, but at least you set that tone and then you tell them. And like Steph was saying, like, for some reasons, people think they can just walk into a gym and they'll figure it out. Any other activity, if you want to play golf, tennis, whatever, you take lessons. And you know how there's only one golf swing, and you do that over and over and over again. So you just use those examples to make them really understand, like, it's the same thing in weight training. Well,
I hope your golf swing's a little bit different between the driver and the putter.
I don't know enough about golf to tell you.
She just swings. So before we move on to intermediate, when you're working with that client and you're just getting started, we've gone over how to handle the programming, what you should be doing with them. But then what's that like magic middle area where then you say, okay, now I can move on because you've made enough progress with your training? Or is it like you guys are confident enough as coaches to know that if they've above all been consistent and they haven't missed sessions, then you can move them on? And another question, would it ever be someone who's training, I would say you're all going to say if they train 2 times a week, they kind of stay as a beginner. But I feel like with the 3-4 times a week, they can move past the beginner stage.
Yeah, but to me, again, coming back to my example of if it's someone with zero athletic background, very poor mind-muscle connection, if you're not coaching them on a day-to-day, they might never progress to the second stage. I'm going to talk about my parents again because they're a perfect example. They've been training at least for 15 years, consistently. But all they get from us is the program. They don't get the coaching.
They've been working out.
They've been working out, but they haven't been training. Yeah. And the proof, again, is yesterday I went while they were training. I go into the gym. I look at my mom do her exercise. She finishes her set. She goes and put the weight back. So, that was a good set. I'm like, no, that was kind of actually a bad set. So why are you saying that? So I'm like, because you stop about 10 reps short of failure. Now they're not the true beginner where they need intermuscular. Well, they probably still could benefit from intermuscular coordination work, but we've been telling them for years the same thing. And my parents are a lot of Gen Pop are like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And every time I tell them to push harder, they're surprised. And then my dad was like, hey, how come now he's 76? How come I'm starting to lose muscle mass? Well, you're not really stimulating anything. You're stopping 10 reps short of failure in everything you're doing. And you're not eating protein. Well, I eat protein. I take the protein powder you gave me. Yeah, you take one scoop. Then what else are you taking? I eat protein. I have one egg for breakfast. Okay, you got 6 grams of protein for they just don't get it. Although we've been telling them a million times. So they've been training for 15 years on their own. They've just been working out. They haven't been training. So their progression, their training age, in my opinion, is the same. There's been zero progression in terms of training age because they don't have the coaching and they don't understand what they need to do to get to that next stage. So to me, it's much easier with that pure Gen Pop to be able to gauge when to go to the next step if you're coaching them one-on-one.
Yeah.
And then if you're starting seeing that the movement control is there and now they're actually able to train under control to near failure and understand what it is to exert themselves without breaking down their technique, then at that point, I think it's fair to say, okay, now you could be considered an intermediate and we can spike it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think the problem is there's several layers to what a novice trainee is. So it's like, all right, the novice is just walking in the gym. We just need to focus on motor learning. Okay, but you can still be a novice while that is no longer the focus. You've got the movement patterns down, but you're still very weak, very underdeveloped. So you could still be a novice. So that they're a novice, then we can say, all right, we now want your sets to be closer to failure. We want to drive that hypertrophy response a bit more. Then it could be a novice that, okay, we're starting them off with standard periodization. They are just doing 3 sets of 10 across the board because they can keep getting better and it's not going to be an issue. Okay, that starts to slow down. It's not really, no more progression. Okay, we can move them on to a linear periodization model. So the intensity is going to increase while the reps are decreasing. Okay, now that's ran its course. We've done that for 3-6 months, but they're still novice at that stage. And then, all right, now once you've ran your course with that periodization model, okay, now we could consider you slightly more than a novice. Like now there is factors that the periodization model or the session structures are no longer addressing that we need to address in more of an intermediate thing. So it could be that the linear periodization, there's too much of a detraining effect from the hypertrophy stimulus to the very end of the program that you're finishing with relative strength, that you're not truly maximizing that process because it's a long-term linear periodization model. Okay, now we need to switch it up the phase undulating model, so we're going to be touching qualities more frequently. So that's the issue. There's way more to it. Oh, you're a novice, this is all you do. Then, okay, once you've ticked that box, you go to intermediate. No, there's steps within novice, and then there's going to be steps within intermediate, and there's steps within advanced.
Even on like a client's perspective, like me being the client, I would say when I first got started, like I was going in again with like the athlete's mindset, and I was one of those beginners that wanted to be advanced. So I had it initially knowing like, and you guys probably both saw it in me that I was like, okay, I had the potential to move past the novice quickly. But even for me, it was so much when I was just getting started. I didn't have any of the intangibles, and it took me years to get them and understand them. And it took training for me to understand it, like what loading really is, what training to failure is the correct way, like not always like, so then I was progressive overload, I'm just gonna like always increase my weight every single time, even when I shouldn't have. So then more people, you tweak things easily. When you're jumping, you're just constantly fighting for more weight and more weight, and my form was breaking down probably in the last couple reps. Like that took me so long, the technique portion of it, so actually always training well, truly learning it. So like before ever moving someone from the beginner to the intermediate, those are some of the things that I find, especially if the clients you're working with, you're just training online, like you're saying, it makes a huge difference if they're working in person with a coach. But those things take the trainee understanding what real training is.
I think consistency in movement, like when I was training people, was definitely the biggest factor, because you know, some clients, they do the first 3 reps right, and then the next 2 reps are all over the place, and then every time you start, like the next session, it's like they forget what they're supposed to do. Like until you can really, really master the form and the technique, then you're always going to stay as a beginner before you even start. You know, if they can, you know, add weight or whatever. It's really like the form.
Remember that woman that would do leg extension while reading her book?
That's why I always put her on machines, because she always, I can't believe she hired
No, that was not
me.
your client.
She was. I trained her a few times.
Okay, but because when I saw her train reading her book, she was not being trained by anyone.
Well, she bought it like a booklet with me, so that was like 10 sessions or something. And then she took out her book as I was training her, and I'm like, well, why did you hire me if you're just going to sit there and like read your book as you're doing it? Oh, but it keeps me focused. I'm like,
makes no sense.
I will not stand next to you and coach you if you are reading a book. Like, it's just not. So she did her 10 sessions, and then that was it. She went back to reading her book. Yeah. But yeah, some people just want to be mindless. And here's another thing. If you're mindless about what you're doing, I remember a client in HB, she was asking, she asked, so this is like, mom couldn't squat her own body weight initially, and then she's training next to an ex-NFL player who's squatting, and she asks him, what are you thinking about? And he's like, oh shit, like he's like focused on everything, like keeping this tight, this da-da-da. And she's like, oh, I'm thinking about what I'm gonna make for dinner for my kids. And I'm like, well, you're never gonna get better if you can't focus on all the things that you need to focus on to get better. Yeah. Like, you have to be intentional.
Yeah. And then like one more point, like also like a kind of a good marker. It's not a 100% foolproof, but a good marker to know if your client is ready to move on to intermediate, in my opinion, is if they can sweat from a strength training workout. I'm not talking about like a metabolic workout.
But they feel tired.
No, but like if they're doing a real strength workout and they can break a sweat, that's typically a sign that they can access enough motor units to have a effective session.
You just have to be careful with that sometimes, because if the person's like a bigger person that maybe hasn't done much.
Yeah, they can sweat at anything.
Yeah, but a bigger, like assuming the person is not a full-blown beginner, a bigger person will also tend to be able to access more motor units by default, because they had to carry their weight for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
But the intermediate, you're going to find them that they're going to have established their movement quality, and they're going to have reached a certain level of relative strength. That's generally a good indication that, okay, we're ready for intermediate, we're ready to add more variation, we're ready to give them different stimulus and stress different factors along their time frame.
So I would think almost like a big thing to watch as a coach is the weight progressions. Like once you are getting close to that intermediate phase, you won't see these substantial jumps or these random 1 week to the next as big. Like their progress is a little bit slower in terms of loading.
Yeah, definitely. Because like a beginner, like the loads could jump 100% from week to week. Like it's actually not that ridiculous. Like you have weeks that something just clicks and they now understand a movement pattern, and all of a sudden you can just keep adding loads. Whereas intermediate, you're probably thinking more 3 to 5%. Like that's, and could be as low as 2, but like that beginner stage of intermediate, it'd be like that 3 to 5% range is more realistic.
I would say too, like another good test is if you do, like, you know how when we talk about like training women and you increase their weight just by a little bit and then it drops their weight, their reps by so much, well, then they're not intermediate. they're still beginner. But I wanted to talk about like athletes too, you know. So we have like athletes don't get a pass just because they're athletes in terms of like they move more quickly, because like some athletes that we know, you know, they come in for their off season, they train for 12 weeks, but they can be not so intentional about the way they train. But then if they don't do anything to maintain during their season and they come back, just because it's year 2 and they're athletes and they're really great on the field doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to move quicker through the novice, intermediate, and advanced.
That's why assessments with athletes are so important to identify where.
Yeah, the only hard thing about the athletes is their nervous systems are generally so well wired, they will move or learn the movement patterns a lot quicker and have that established much easier than the gen pop. But yeah, it doesn't mean you need to rush them to really advanced techniques by any means. It just means that they're going to look better way quicker, and you'll be able to be more aggressive with their loading because of that.
So once you get to intermediate, because I know you were mentioning linear progression for the novice, so this is when you can start like confidently implementing undulating periodization more?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like obviously you can use undulating periodization with novices, but the issue with that is drastic swings in intensity and reps from phase to phase can be really hard for them to deal with. They're not going to understand their loading. They're not going to adapt well to that style of loading a lot of the time. So like say you're doing 3x12 and then you're moving to the next phase, which is 4x8. So it's an 8% jump in intensity. So not a huge jump, but that there could represent, say it's a 20-pound jump in whatever loads they're doing for whatever exercise. That could just be too much, that all of a sudden instead of them being able to do 8 reps, they can only get 3 just because they have no efficiency in recruiting those motor units. So that style of periodization sometimes just isn't great with the novice clientele, and that's why linear can be really good because it's more gradual. But now that you've got the intermediate, they've learned the skill of recruiting these motor units. They've already got the movement pattern down. So now these fluctuations of intensity aren't that big a deal anymore. So they're more able to cope with that stressor, and they're going to find it more beneficial because they're getting to touch more different qualities throughout the time frame. So they're never detraining the previously trained quality, which is why our fall back to periodization model is phase undulating, because it suits so many people and it's so well suited to long-term periodization.
Yeah, that's the key point. Like the reason why that's our staple is because it's perfect for long-term people who train year-round. So that's the big difference, because we're catering to personal training. Well, your clients, they're training year-round, so you want a system that allows you to do so, recover from it properly, but have enough fluctuations so you're not always detraining a previously trained quality, so that you can actually improve in a linear, like if you step back and look at the big picture, so that you can improve in a linear fashion over time.
In terms of exercise selection, like now you can definitely vary the exercise selection much more at this point.
Yeah, so at this point, it's our general go-to is to introduce the variable block. So that pretty much just means you have the same exercise selection for 3 weeks and then it changes for the next 3 weeks. So it means we're going to have a very well-rounded exposure of all our primary exercises and assistance and remedials, but it also allows for some level of consistency within the phase, so that the trainee can still get more proficient at that movement pattern, at that intensity with those loads, and start to express more and more strength. Whereas if there's too much fluctuation, that level probably won't adapt very well to that, and there'll be too much of a motor learning aspect on each week for them ever to truly express strength. So they need some level of consistency, but some level of variability throughout time, so there's not like overuse patterns developed. There's not maladaptation due to being overly adapted to the same stimulus at all times. So that's, again, at the intermediate level, that's more, we'll move to the variable block, whereas the novice, a fixed block where you're just doing the exact same exercise selection for a longer period of time, 6 weeks. You could push it longer than that if they're really, really bad at movement, and if they're only training twice a week, like, it's not a big deal. But yeah, 6 weeks is normally the go-to for the novice.
In terms of like our training courses, so obviously we have our program designed, but with something like the PAB, which you can use with beginners, like novice trainees, because there you're trying to build the joint resiliency, you're trying to establish good movement patterns, but there are different exercises. But what you were talking about earlier doesn't necessarily apply to that, like the PAB training system, because it's not the compound movements as much. We're talking more about like the remedial work.
Yeah, but don't forget though that PAB does have a compound lift
just
component.
Not at the start of the session.
Yeah, it's just not the priority, but it's still there, and it's there most specifically so that you can learn and build some intermuscular coordination, because it's such an important skill. And that's one of our issue with more traditional early stage training programs that focuses too much on unilateral or single joint training is, yes, you're doing all of this. You're affecting the joint, you're affecting the muscle, but you're not really helping the client develop the skill to coordinate and synchronize motor unit recruitment to actually get better. And then once you move on to bilateral training, now you need to start learning that skill. So you basically wasted all that time where you could just integrate it to the process with a regression of a primary pattern that fits the physiology or biomechanics of the client's current stage. So at least you're developing that. And then with the surrounding exercises, then you're affecting the joints and the musculature with targeted movements.
Yeah. There's so much nuance to all, well, strength training in general, but even within our systems, because we try to get it across as much as possible. Like with PAB, we're saying, yes, you can use it in the early stages with beginners, but you can also use it with the advanced lifters, because as everyone keeps training, as you go from intermediate to advanced, your strength training, you're strong, your relative strength scores are high. The training does wear on you to a certain extent. So like using the PAB with those intermediate to advanced, if like random nags come up, if you see some like range of motion issues, you can still use that system to help those lifters as well. I just want to always clarify that like each of the systems can be applied to each group. I do also want to bring up like our fat loss and hypertrophy specialization courses, because within that, I know we've discussed it before, we have the novice, intermediate, and advanced plans. But that doesn't necessarily apply to this training age. I know you say that if you do it again, you'd
call it different.
You'd rename it differently, because you're saying that they're novice to that style of training, to that system of training.
Yeah, I mean the fat loss specialization is a little bit different, because the fat loss specialization, we know that trainers getting that information are going to apply fat loss training strategies with pure beginners. Yeah. So now the novice for the fat loss specialization is actually catered to the true beginner, and that's why it's built completely different than the intermediate or advanced structure, because the true beginner, if you really want to maximize fat loss through strength training, you first need to build the skills of training and the skills of recruiting more motor units in order to make the training effective. So that training style for the novice is very different because it incorporates that aspect. As you move on to the intermediate and advanced, then it's more traditional, metabolic driven base strength training, where now a intermediate trainee or advanced trainee, in the real sense of what we're talking about, these modalities would fit. Now with the hypertrophy, it's different. The hypertrophy specialization, it's more about, are you a novice in this type of hypertrophy specialization training? Even if you have 4 years training age, if you've never done this type of training, your first time doing it, use the novice approach.
Yeah.
Because with hypertrophy specialization, the only difference between the novice, intermediate, and advanced is the actual volume, series time of retention, average intensity. So this really fits the bill of novice, intermediate, and advanced for that style of training. Whereas I would say the fat loss specialization, you can actually use it more on a training age perspective.
Yeah. Going back?
Because the only reason why the hypertrophy is that way is because we believe that there is no point, no reason whatsoever for a true beginner to do hypertrophy specialization training. In my head, it was so clear that shouldn't be a thing, that it was very clear in my head when I wrote novice, intermediate, and advanced that I meant novice, intermediate, and advanced to this style of training. But now, in retrospect, I understand that people make the mistake and they will give the novice hypertrophy specialization to someone who's been training for 2 months, but it makes no sense. They don't even need that type of training to build muscle, because the first year you'll build a lot of hypertrophy just from regular strength training.
Yeah. So moving on from the intermediate to now the advanced. I mean, that's talking like, obviously there's that stage from going from beginner to advanced. That's kind of narrow.
Beginner
but then,
to intermediate.
Yeah, beginner to intermediate, where it's narrow, but then you get within that intermediate. And I feel like a lot of trainees will stay intermediate for quite some time before earning the right to really be an advanced trainee.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, my online clients, I train 99% of them are personal trainers and coaches. Not more than 5% of them are advanced on a true training perspective.
Because then you're going on like a neural response to the training. The actual, there so much more lies in the relative strength scores when you're looking at
but even
advanced.
skills, like for example, like if you've been training for 10 years hard, but you've never done any supramax eccentrics, I mean, you're not advanced, because you've never done like a pretty basic advanced training strategy.
But then they have to be advanced in order to do that, though. So
They have to be
No,
intermediate.
But that's just one easy example. But there's many of them. But obviously relative strength is a very cool gauge, because your relative strength status is a good representation of your neural abilities. So if you lack intramuscular coordination, it will be affected by your relative strength status. If you lack intermuscular coordination, it will be affected by your relative strength status as well. So to me, it's a very, instead of being abstract and subjective, now we have a very objective and clear understanding of the neural skills of the trainee.
Yeah. And then what comes to play the most is managing their recovery because of all of those things. So what can you do within their actual training to help manage recovery becomes a big point of what you're looking at for the programming.
With the advanced?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's like so multifactorial. There's exercise selection, there's microcycle structure, there's mesocycle loading strategies, there's the macrocycle layout, there's the goal of the macrocycle that can change. I mean, there's many things involved here.
Yeah. So when it comes to advanced, like the reason, one of the big reasons that you have to manage fatigue so much is because now they're so efficient at recruiting motor units that every time they go in and train, they're creating a lot of fatigue. They have the ability now to create a lot of fatigue. They're really efficient in creating motor units, and they're generally doing that with very heavy loads. So every time they go exert themselves, you have to account for the fatigue element. So using recovery strategies within the program design periodization is the way that we can manipulate the training to allow for continuous progress. So like Steph was saying, all his factors, then you've got, so he didn't bring up periodization models, so we could do weekly undulating periodization, daily undulating periodization. So there's more fluctuations between the stressors, there's more variability being implemented, so there's more opportunities for recovery. So they're not getting the same stressor over and over and over again. Can they handle the same stressor over and over and over again? Yes. That's the hard thing about advanced trainees is they can handle pretty much anything. But for certain periods of time, under certain circumstances, it's not they can do this forever. Like, can they do super maximal eccentrics on 3 or 4 different exercises across a week? Yes, they could. But for how long? Why? What's their preparation for that? What's the recovery period after that? Like, they can handle anything. It's the implementation of that and the recovery strategies to manage that is where it comes really important.
Yeah, like fatigue management with that clientele is definitely the most important thing. And it's because, like Porrick said, when you're really advanced, your ability to recruit a lot of motor units is really high. Your intermuscular coordination is really high. So you have lots of skills at synchronizing recruitment to displace the load in a given motor pattern. And because you're recruiting a lot of motor units and you have skills, your output is really high. So you're really strong. And then if you're really strong and then you're doing an eccentric phase, well, this is a lot of trauma. And in fact, there's just a recent study that just came out a few months ago that showcased that heavy loaded time spent in a lengthened position with heavy loads creates a ton of sarcomerogenesis and a ton of muscular trauma. So the stronger you are, the more time you spend doing eccentric, guess what's going to happen? The longer the recovery curve, because now it's way more load that you have to recover from. So now if you're doing supramax eccentric type of work with that clientele, well, now you need to be really, really clever on how you manipulate the week, how you manipulate the exercise, how you manipulate the microcycle structure, the mesocycle loading to make sure that there's not a point of diminishing return in terms of the recovery because you're subjecting to the trainee to pretty hardcore training style. So it's so nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah.
It goes back to, I just think of the episode we did last week with Christian Laval, and the whole thing was like, what moves the needle? And I just find that, like, you start with the beginners and a lot moves the needle. You can just have that needle moving up and down constantly. But then you get towards that advanced, and it's like these little tiny manipulations that are required to keep moving the needle.
You got to fight for all the progress when you're advanced as opposed to when you're beginner. It can happen more quickly.
And then it's not losing track of where you're going.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, as you get more advanced, it's really hard to keep improving, but it's not that hard to regress either. So if you're on a roll and your training is going really well and the programming is well orchestrated, and then you had a very good increase, but then somehow the next macro cycle, I don't know, there's a change of mind, you've been influenced by something you've seen on social media, or you're just bored and you want to change the style of training, and then you do something else. But that the next macro cycle pulls you away from the tendency at which you kept improving prior to, and then you're shifting the stressor towards something else. Well, you might improve that next thing you're trying, but then what's going to happen is you've detrained what you were on a roll on. So then by the time you get back to this, then you need to regain that and go back onto that track. So whatever that marker was, if that was your main marker you were looking for, then you just delayed and slowed down the rate at which you were going to reach that target. So it gets kind of complicated And it gets hard to not lose track while you're dealing with the really advanced, because the true beginner, not true beginner, but the late stage beginner to early stage intermediate, you can have more variation in style. And as you get back to the other thing, you're still going to be able to progress. It's not as like drastic, but when you're really advanced, you have to be more careful. Like that's why like training advanced clients, it's a little bit more complicated because you need more tools in your toolbox to truly manage and decipher what's going on with the training response.
Yeah. I mean, that's so much. We always laugh with our comprehensive periodization and program design courses. Like, a lot of that is built for that, like having all of the tools and all the different scenarios, being able to analyze so much of the client strength ratios from remedial assistance, everything to be able to personalize the session to still drive progress for as long as possible.
Because like we know, and it's normal, nothing is linear.
Yeah.
But what you need to do at that level is making sure that the drops don't drop too much or for too long.
Yeah.
Like you need to accept there will be drops and fluctuations, but you need to make sure you're managing that so it's not.
And at the same time, I know this isn't what you're specifically talking about, but it is when you earn a higher training age, you don't if you take a week of active recovery, it's different for everyone. We've discussed this, but you don't lose so much of the skill and strength compared to the beginners. I know that's not what you're talking about, but I'm just saying that's also a sign of like what happens when they do have to step away from training for a vacation or something like that when they get back to the gym.
Yeah, but again, everybody's different. Everybody reacts differently. So, I know Pork and I are different on that front. Like, I enjoy and benefit a full-blown week off of the gym as an active recovery where he needs to still be in the weight room.
Yeah, I deflate.
Well, I think it's also just your difference in also age plays into it, and you don't have as many years training as he does, and you really had to, not you did too when you were younger, but fight for a lot of the size you've put on, and then you probably naturally aren't as muscular, so when you're not training, it just drops.
It tries to bring me back to 175.
Your baseline isn't that.
But also sometimes I wonder, and this is I have zero scientific backing on this. It's just an observation. That's something that I thought about over the years. Sometimes I wonder if people who need to really grind and fight to gain, okay? So they're inflamed. When you're inflamed, they're swelling. And then you take the week completely off. The inflammation subside, the swelling subside. So when you get back into the gym, you don't have that
the cushion,
and that springboard. And then you feel like you're weaker. I wonder if this sometimes with certain people can be a thing.
Yeah,
I'm sure it could be. I can definitely tell that weaker. I always feel a little weaker after the recovery week, but what it always does is that first week back, I am sore as shit.
Yeah,
it's like I've never trained before in my life, but I'm still able to lift decently heavy loads, so I'm still causing a shit ton of fatigue and muscle damage. So it's it's a rough week.
Okay. Are there any final thoughts on whether you have a point to make on beginner, intermediate, or advanced that you'd like our listeners to end on?
Don't feel the need to rush through any stage. As long as you're making progress, it doesn't matter if you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced.
Yeah, the name of you don't need to name it. Just if you're training someone, you'll just see how to progress them. You have to use your intuition, see how they're evolving in their training, and who cares? It's just a title. It doesn't really mean anything.
We like to talk about it because we felt there was a need for people to understand the difference between how you address a beginner, how you address an intermediate, how you address an advanced. And all of them have different needs, different modalities that will benefit them. But like a lot of your Gen Pop are going to be, especially if they're training once or twice a week, they're going to be beginners for the rest of their lives, and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
And there are different things
but
you
it's
can
it's
do
under
with them.
it's understanding that these clients then they won't have any benefit outside of recreational like happiness of doing
Recreational happiness.
like crazy like stuff and like chains and bands and like eccentric hooks and daily undulating double split like it's not warranted for them. It's actually a detraction.
Yeah, I feel like a safe way if the clients really need variety or need a change of pace is to take them through the majority of their session on the basic strength movements and then finishing it up with like a conditioning circuit, like get some different movement patterns in, make them feel like they're working a little bit, and it's a good easy way to just mentally have them end on that note.
Or tell them you change the playlist. That's your variety for today.
But honestly, to be like for the true beginner, like what Porrick was talking about earlier, like the standard periodization model.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the first 3 months of a true beginner, maybe 6 months, depending on their rate of progress, it's probably the most effective way to do it. And I would even do it kind of like the way Anthony DeTillo like loaded, which is, so let's say he was saying 3x10. Okay, cool. So you start 3x10 with a manageable weight, like decent amount of reps in reserve. It doesn't matter. They're building the skill. And then they do 10 reps. Then they try to do 11, 12. Don't even worry about the weight. Increase the reps. Because anyways, to build more rep volume in the early stage is a good thing.
Yeah.
Then you reach 15, for example.
Yeah.
Then, novelty, let's increase the weight a little bit. Let's bring it back down to 10. Then you build it back up to 15. Like it legit can be as simple as that. And they're going to have better success than program hopping every 4 weeks just for novelty's sake.
Yeah. Well, it is the American Thanksgiving this week, so happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We are extremely grateful for you. I will give everyone a heads up. You're going to want to head to trainkilo.com right now for all the goodies. And we do have the new online PAB course is available. That is a beast of the course. New ongoing programming, so our Train Heroic programming, Mass Avenue, and Burn Burrow, so hypertrophy and fat loss programs have been introduced for our Train Heroic programs. We did bring back, this is your final chance for the archived PDF programs. I got enough DMs and emails that we brought them back one final time. But again, thank you for your continued support. Like, subscribe, send it to a fellow trainer. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.